So what is purchasing? Purchasing is simply the act of going out and buying something. Not a whole lot of research goes into it, such as strategic sourcing, where we're actually trying to find the best thing out there. But you can think of purchasing as you go to the store and buy something off the shelf. It's not really customized. It's not a whole lot of effort goes into it. You just go out and buy it. So part of this purchasing process is part of our SCORE model, the supply chain operational reference. So we have planning. So we plan the entire process, but that first step underneath planning is source. Well, we have to determine whether we're going to source it, and then after that, it goes with the make arrow there. So we have our buy, which is source, versus a make decision. So we're looking at, do we just go out and buy it because we can't make it or we don't want to make it? Or do we make it because we have the skills and ability to do it and it's worth doing for us? And then finally it gets delivered to us. And then we have the returns, because sometimes things get returned to our customer returns it back to us, or we return it back to our supplier. But we have to enable the whole process. So we have to enable communications. We have to enable everything in there. And as you can see on the bottom of the SCORE model, every level has these steps: source, make, deliver, return, and enable. So we have in the center here is our company. It's also called the focal firm for this model, because the focal firm can be anybody on here, but when the middle is always the focal firm. And then we have, in this case, our customer, and then our customer's customer when we move to the right, and then to the left we have our supplier, and then our supplier's supplier. So as you can see, everybody has all these steps from plan all the way through enable. But let's go further and define purchasing as the Institute of Supply Management does. So as you can see on the screen here, the identification, acquisition, access, positioning, management of resources, and related capabilities the organization needs or potentially needs in the attainment of its strategic objectives. That's a whole lot of words to define purchasing. So really, it comes down to identifying and then making that acquisition. And we're trying to achieve our strategic objectives. That's really all it is. But we can get a little deeper into it because we have these 7 rights of purchasing. And with all these, we have to keep these in mind, because if we do this right, we're going to do so great at our jobs. And if you've ever done any of these wrong, you've probably made yourself frustrating yourself personally, and you might have had to return something. So we need to obtain the right material in the right quantity at the right time for delivery to the right place from the right supplier with the right service at the right price. So out of all of these, which one do you think is most important? Unfortunately, the slide is giving it away because the supplier is the most important one out of all of these. The supplier is going to make sure that we get the right quality or the quantity. And they're going to make sure that we get it at the right, they're going to send it to the right place. We're going to get the right service from our supplier, and they're going to give us the right price. So if you get a question or something like that, the most important thing of the 7 rights of purchasing is the right supplier. But we have these 7 rights, but how did purchasing come about? Well, we have an evolution of purchasing. So we first started off in a clerical era. So this was before World War II, where purchasing was just viewed as a clerical function. Somebody back during that time, there was a lot of women who sat at typewriters and they would type out requisitions. But during World War II, there was a lot of material shortages. We were building warships. We were trying to feed an army. We were trying to send things overseas to Europe and Asia. So we were trying to do a lot at the same time. So we had a lot of material shortages. But then we started to move into a transactional era. So about 1950 to the early 70s, purchasing became a managerial function. So that we actually got a manager now. So a manager was overseeing this. So about 1973 to the mid-80s, scarcity and inflation increased purchasing's visibility. Well, prices were going up so much that purchasing had to make an impact because a lot of companies went under because the goods were getting too expensive. But if you have a good purchasing team, they can negotiate the best prices. And that saved a lot of companies. So in 1985 to 1995, lean management makes purchasing quasi-strategic. So now we're starting to move into the strategic era, where companies are starting to realize that the strategy, their company's strategic goals can be accomplished through purchasing. So now we're starting to look more and more towards maybe other countries, other businesses that can support us, or other suppliers, instead of the supplier that we've always used that is probably charging us way too much. Start looking at other ones. Then we have 1995 to 2005. Outsourcing makes purchasing strategic. There's some companies that actually outsource their entire purchasing departments. So, and when they do that, they see quite a bit of savings because there's companies, outsourcing companies, that's what they do. There's a couple of them in Pittsburgh that do this. And it's amazing that they can do so much and save so much for a company, especially when a company's small and they can't afford, let's say, a purchasing department. Or they're growing and they just can't handle the volume of purchases or the complexity of purchases they need to do. But then we have the purchasing of tomorrow. Supply chain integration gets invited into the executive suite, the C-suite, the chief executive, or the chief suites. So usually you'll find supply chain under the chief information officer, or sometimes the chief operations officer. Well, they're starting to become more and more popular, a chief procurement officer who oversees a company's procurement, purchasing and strategic sourcing. And that shows that the companies realize how valuable the purchasing is, because as we'll go over later, every dollar saved in purchasing is a dollar directly to the bottom line. Sales can't do that. A dollar in sales usually ends up being about 50 to 80 cents towards the bottom line. But a dollar saved in purchasing is a dollar directly to that bottom line. So I'm hoping that you understand purchasing a little bit better by learning about the history and that stuff. So why don't we look at strategic sourcing next? Because that's the other half of this topic. And this is where it really gets interesting, because we're looking for things that we may not be able to buy off the shelf. So let's go ahead and move on to that in the next video.